All right, we will go ahead and get things started. Thank you all for coming. Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Gowell. I'm the host of the Grit City Think and Drink. I am a faculty member with Mike over in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences at UW Tacoma. And this is now our 5th year of running this event. So if you haven't been here, actually give me a thumbs up. I think you should be doing reactions. Give me a thumbs up or something if this is your first time to the Think and Drink. See how many people we got. I get 10. Oh, we got 11, 12 newbies. Awesome. Well, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the first time you come, you buy drinks for everybody else. So we'll have to cash in on that later when we can actually do it in person. But thank you all for coming. This happens the second Tuesday of every month, and we are looking still to fill up some other slots in the 2022 calendar. So if you have ideas for anybody that you think would make an excellent speaker, you can chat that to me at any time, and I will see if, and especially if you have some contact info, and I'll see if I can get them in. The one plus side of COVID is that we're able, since we're not in person, we're able to bring in speakers from all over the place, which is really nice to kind of share some things going across the country and so on. So our next talk in March is going to be from Chris Forrest, who's faculty member at Penn State University, and he does work on carbon emissions, and he's going to talk about what it takes getting to net zero carbon. How hard is it and what's at stake? So hopefully you'll join us on March 8th for that talk, and then we're looking forward to other speakers coming down the line. So again, if you have some ideas, definitely chat that at any time. My email also is down on the slide here, jimgowell@uw.edu. And if you want to know what's coming up and you want to get the links to get onto here, you can go to the Grit City Think and Drink website, which is on the lower left as well. And that will give you all the different things that are coming up, as well as access to the recordings for the things that you might have missed. So if you want to go back and check out some of the other exciting talks we've had, definitely check that out. And it'd be great to see some more of you later on in the year. So, the way this is going to work. So Mike, after I introduce Mike, he's going to give us a talk, which will be amazing. It will knock your socks off. And then after Mike gives his talk, we will give him a short break, and we will actually give you socks to replace the ones that were knocked off. So these right here are the Grit City Think and Drink socks. So we'll give some of those away for some different trivia questions that I will come up with on my own. And then Mike will do some Q&A. So make sure you have your chat function ready so you can ask your questions later on. You can ask him at any point, and I can go back to him if something hits you while he's talking, but we won't interrupt him while he's going. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen. So Mike, you can start up yours. And I will introduce our speaker tonight. So our speaker tonight is Dr. Michael Honey. He's a former Southern Civil Liberties organizer and a scholar of African-American labor and civil rights history and of nonviolence and Martin Luther King Jr. He is the Fred and Dorothy Haley Professor of Humanities at the UW in Tacoma and a graduate of Oakland, Howard, and Northern Illinois universities. His work has earned support from such institutions as the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Simpson Center for the Humanities, among others, along with multiple book awards from the Organization of American Historians, Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, and the Southern Historical Association. So thank you, Mike, for being here tonight, and we appreciate it. And the floor is all yours if you want to share your stuff.
Can you see that, Jim?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Right now, I don't see.
Let's see. Oh, I know. I have to do this first. How's that?
Yeah, I've got your main screen. Yep. Yep.
There we go.
And then you're just going to go to slideshow.
Okay, so everybody, I'm glad to be here and doing this. I have to warn you, it's a little bit awkward. As you can see, I'm in my second bedroom in our house with books and stuff. So my platform is a little shaky, but hopefully it'll work okay. And also, I don't have those earbuds that some people have, but hopefully this will be okay. So my philosophy on this one has been basically the pictures tell the story. I worked with a Black photographer in Memphis, and that was his slogan. He was one of the people that photographed Emmett Till after he was first murdered. His pictures opened up a lot of territory in the civil rights movement. I'll bring him up again later. His name was Ernest Withers, and I'll tell you a surprising story about him. But he said, pictures tell the story, and that certainly was true in his case. So I wanted to start by acknowledging that we're on the Puyallup tribe's land here at the University of Washington, Tacoma, that we have one of the most diverse student populations in the Pacific Northwest, certainly of all the UW campuses. And I'd like to really give thanks for being here as a founding faculty member starting in 1990. And thanks also to the Haley family that has provided a professorship that has helped me to do my work. Another thank you is to Howard University, which is what got me on the road to studying Black history and Southern history and opened up the whole world of history to me. In the last couple of weeks, people have been threatening Howard with bombing and also bombing other historically Black universities. I think 11 of them have received bomb threats. So that tells you why HBCUs are so important, especially in this time of pandemic and racial and economic justice. Let's see here. This takes us back a little ways to early days at our campus. And toward the end, I'll take us even further back. This is Kathy Tashiro and Mike Calton are both in this Zoom call, I think. This was our fighting for the graduate students to have a union. And this has been a theme through my whole life, and you will see as the talk goes on that that's the case. Anthony Craigie, one of our students in the student newspaper, had a good column last week saying racial education is incomplete in many US schools. All of it should be taught, not just the easy parts. And I wanted to talk about that for a minute, because in the moment that we're in historically, we have the Republican Party and Fox News and others trying to ban the teaching of Black history, essentially, labor history, gay history, any history that might make people question our structures of power. Anything, as some of the legislation says, that might make children uncomfortable is not allowed if it has to do with racial and ethnic kinds of themes or identity themes, gender themes. Really, it's about what makes the white parents uncomfortable. That's really the issue. But it's also this ideology that people in the right-wing spectrum politically want educators to talk about freedom all the time and to make America great again, with the idea that the freedom that they're talking about is what's in the 1787 Constitution, and that it's a static concept, something that Supreme Court nominees by former President Trump want to take us back to 1787, when Black people were slaves and women couldn't vote and most working people couldn't vote. It's a totally fallacious idea of how you could rule on the law. So I've, in my teaching, been using Eric Foner's framework. He says, everyone talks about freedom, but what does it mean? Freedom for who to do what? Individual or social responsibility. In the time we're in, this seems to be the key issue. Is it freedom for everybody to do whatever they want, regardless of what the consequences are for everybody else? And what is the answer to the question of what is freedom? Foner says freedom is an evolving concept. It's not just the Constitution of 1787. It's not even just the Declaration of Independence, but there's great ideas there. So everyone from Martin Luther King to the Black Panther Party talked about the Declaration of Independence. The Black Panther Party even quotes it in its 10-point program, that all people are created equal, endowed with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But people didn't have that, obviously, at the beginning of the country. And Foner argues that freedom is an evolving concept. These are great ideas, but the issue is, how do we make them real? And so we're in that same struggle right now over two different meanings of freedom. One is that it's static, it's something in the past, it's inviolable, and we can't move forward. And the other is an idea of freedom as an evolving process based on social movements and social justice and the kinds of things that Martin Luther King was talking about toward the end of his life. My work has been to try to make the connections in freedom movement history between labor and civil rights. And these are some of the books that came out of that. The most important one, I would say, well, Black Workers Remember was a fantastic experience interviewing Black workers in the South. And this first one, Southern Labor and Black Civil Rights, I probably interviewed 50 white and Black workers. The Going Down Jericho Road really took me into learning more about Martin Luther King and really rescuing him from a too simple label of civil rights leader. Rather, in this book and other things I've written, we see him as he actually was, a radical nonviolence and social justice advocate, a strong union supporter, and a sharp critic of American wars. After Dr. King died in 1968, April 4th, he left behind a warning that was published in Look magazine after his death. His fear that systemic racism and individual racism in the US would lead us to a kind of fascism. And in 1970, after King died, President Richard Nixon's campaign manager and Attorney General John Mitchell said, "We're going to take America so far to the right that you won't recognize it." And now we sort of know what he was talking about after going through the Trump experience. But people aren't staying still. They're not putting up with it. James Lawson, who I'll talk about for a minute later on, a great nonviolence prophet, says that today we need to build a nonviolent movement greater than the world has ever seen before. In the summer of 2020, we had that movement. The Washington Post documented over 7,000 Black Lives Matter protests around the country and involving millions around the world, 21 of them here in Tacoma. These were demonstrations against police brutality, and they were by and large peaceful, but often attacked by the police. So it often appeared to the public as a violent confrontation, as in Portland and Seattle, we saw that. But actually, as in many cases in our history, it's really about how the police respond. So we're still fighting all these issues out. I'll bring this up again in my own experience. So I think Black Lives Matter movement and other movements around this show that really it's too late for the right-wing conservatives to return to, quote, "The Lies My Teacher Told Me," which is a book by James Lowen after he reviewed K through 12 history textbooks. Young people don't accept this version of history anymore, the Trump version. It's too late. You can't put this back in the bottle. So they're fighting a losing battle. I'm sure of that. I'd like to take you now to back in time. The work I'm doing right now is a kind of guide to a certain period of history that I was part of as an organizer. And I want to go back through my own eyes and my own memories as one of the participants. It sort of draws on the women's movement slogan, "The personal is political." I think that there's a lot to be said for telling the story, because it was a certain kind of story that not very many people had. And in reviewing this and writing about it, the question keeps coming up to me is what is past and what is present, and the struggle to be free. It seems a lot the same, and a lot of ups and downs. So I'm going to just take you back a little bit in time, and just bear with me. I'll just kind of hopefully glide through the stories. I'm not going to go into the details. You'll just have to read it when the book comes out. But in my story, it starts out with men in war. And my great-great-great-grandfather came from England in the 1830s, signed up for the Union Army at age 44, and fought and got captured at Gettysburg in 1863 and put into Andersonville prison in Georgia, a real hellhole of a place. I don't think he had any consciousness of fighting against racism. He was from Michigan, and before that, England. But in fact, he helped to overthrow Southern slavery. My grandfather, my father's father, ended up fighting another war in Siberia, trying to overthrow the Russian Revolution. And he told my father that it was a shameful war. He found himself with a gun fighting people with pitchforks in Siberia. So this is the ugly freedom side of America, is trying to impose its rule on other people. Then comes my father at age 20, enlisting in the Navy during the Pacific War, and his plane crashing and his comrades dying and him almost dying. And this is what the last time people would say, I think, was a good war, World War II. I don't think any war is a good war. Keith came back from this pretty horrific experience and married Betty Miner. They're both from Detroit. These are the two people, of course, that made my life possible. I was born in 1947. They both gave me a foundation in life. And as I'm writing about this, the gratitude that I feel is about the foundation that they gave me. Not everybody gets this. And so as I was growing up, we didn't grow up rich or even middle class, but my dad worked his way out of the working class and into professional class, I guess you would say. This is growing up in Edgemont Street in Toledo, Ohio. My mother told me from an early age that racism was a big issue in Detroit, where they were both from. And she, throughout my life, sort of paralleled me in becoming an activist and organizer. My parents grew up, one is Catholic and one is Christian Science, and then they became Unitarians. And that's what happened with me. I became a Unitarian, and this led to becoming a conscientious objector to war. So we went through the phases of childhood, looked like, Ozzie and Harriet land, like kids that are doing really, really well, which we were. But later, myself on the left, my brother Charles in the middle, and my sister Maureen all became writers and people of the book world. My brother is a journalist, my sister as a historian or American Studies and literature and historian person at the University of Nebraska doing women's studies. What happened with me during this time was the draft and the war. And watching the evolution of the freedom movement in the 60s had a powerful effect. I was too young, really. I was still in high school to go down south and participate. But all these things that happened had a big impact on me. That's John Lewis there being beaten to the ground. And it opened up the eyes of many, many people. And my parents and I both, and my sister and my brother, paralleled our sort of radicalization during the 60s based on what was going on. This is in Detroit. Detroit was a huge hub for freedom movement activity. It was a majority Black city, heavy working class, many people in the auto industry, and almost all of my family came from here. And so it was something that always made a big impact on us, and came in areas with Walter Reuther and the UAW in 1963. Me, I'm in this little town called Williamston, a farming community, really far away from those urban centers, except that we went back there all the time to visit grandparents. And really, if you can imagine this, this happens to a lot of people. Anthony Craigie talked about this. I grew up in an all-white town in my high school years in Williamston. But what led me into activism, I think, was music. This is me on the left. This is my good buddy, Mike McNeely on the right. And this is Pete Seeger on the right and me on the left. Pete and other people who were doing what we called folk music opened up American history and labor and Black freedom studies in a different way. When I graduated, I looked excessively straight, but pretty soon the looks changed. I went to Hong Kong, study abroad, and it really opened my eyes to poverty in the rest of the world. And it was a life-changing experience as a student. I became the editor of our campus newspaper at Oakland University, and nearby in Detroit, we were very close by, we saw the unraveling of what we thought of as a liberal city, and turned out it wasn't so liberal. Had horrific uprisings in the summer of 1967 after terrible incidents of police brutality and systemic racism, setting off what King called the triple evils of racism, poverty, and militarism. We covered all these things in our newspaper. We talked about the Black freedom movement, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. We had, at that time, 600 so-called underground newspapers in the United States fighting the war and racism and poverty, and many college papers just like ours doing the same thing, telling the same story. I became part of Students for Democratic Society. And of course, this was going on all across the country, students demanding democratic rights on campus, not to be treated like children anymore. The Black Panther Party had a big impact on all of us. It's a 10-point platform. If you read it even today, it still rings true, the things mostly that they were demanding. And the great boycott, farm workers movement, and then the awful tragedy of Dr. King being assassinated by a white racist. And I'll just play you a little clip here from what was going on that led to his assassination. Oops. Is it gonna play?
To be free.
If we are going to get equality, if we are going to get adequate wages, we are going to have to struggle for it. Now, you know what? You may have to escalate the struggle a bit. If they keep refusing and they will not recognize the union and will not agree for the check off of the collection of dues, I tell you what you ought to do, and you're together here enough to do it. In a few days, you ought to get together and just have a general wet stoppage in the city of Memphis.
You know we're standing for our unions and we shall not be moved. You know we're standing for our unions and know that we shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. To be
So that became sort of a marker in my life, was 1968. That happened for a lot of people. Not only was King killed, but Robert F. Kennedy was killed. Martha Allen and I and David Black, who's on this call, I think we all went to the march, the Poor People's March that King was organizing. We did everything we could to stop the war. And in November, we mobilized for peace with one of the biggest anti-war demonstrations in American history. Martha and I got married in her father's backyard in East Lansing, and we also were married to the movement, it seems. We put out 50,000 copies of this newspaper. We distributed it by hand throughout Lansing, Michigan. And we all went to this demonstration. Actually, Dave Black ran into us at this demonstration.
On November 15th, 1969, 500,000 citizens turned out against the war in Washington again. This time, buses provided an impenetrable wall around the White House. President Nixon claimed he was too busy watching football on television to pay attention. But he did suggest that Army helicopters might be used to blow out the marchers' candles. Hundreds of thousands of others demonstrated in San Francisco and New York.
So instead of Robert Kennedy, we got the election of Richard Nixon. And this country is going so far to the right, you won't recognize it. And during this period was a terrible period of government repression of all the movements. At this same time, I thought I was going to go to prison for 5 years for refusing the draft, but instead my draft board made me a conscientious objector status and gave me alternative service to the military. And the Unitarian Service Committee, which was a bona fide hiring group for the draft, hooked me up with the Southern Conference Educational Fund, interracial movement group going back to 1938. And then I became, after that, the Southern Director of the National Committee Against Repressive Legislation and the Committee to Free All Political Prisoners, Angela Davis, and you can see all of that here. So this was a formative period in my life. Martha and I, you know, when we started in Michigan, looked pretty hip. But when we went to Louisville, this is how we looked. We were trying to provoke as little condemnation from the community, white community anyway, as possible. We worked with Carl and Braden, who were legendary anti-racist whites in the South, both journalists. Carl had gone to prison twice, once for selling a home to a Black family, another for refusing to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. They were called communists. Anybody that worked for them was a communist. And so, of course, as soon as we got there, we were in big trouble. This is Fred Hampton, one of the great young leaders of the Black Panther Party. And you see him there with Dr. Spock, the baby doctor. As soon as we got down to Louisville and started working for the Bradens, one of the first things that happened was Fred Hampton was murdered on December 4th, 1970, in a conspiracy by the Chicago police and the FBI. Every story I'm telling you, I'm just skimming the surface, so you'd have to really study in depth what happened. But it really was a police murder, 70 shots going into his apartment, no shots coming out, all set up by an FBI agent. And this is the kind of thing that was going on, and people in power were getting away with it. So we went up there with some Black Panther members from Louisville, and it was a frightening scene. When we went to the Black Panther office, there were guns everywhere, and the police were everywhere. we were lucky, really, that we got back. The Panthers that were with us, one of them had a gun. We didn't know that. And so fortunately, we weren't stopped by the police. When we came back, our job was organizing the defense of the so-called Black Six. These were people who, I'll go back for a minute, who had protested the murder of Dr. King, and the police waded in, started a riot, and then charged the leaders of this rally, all Black community leaders, with causing the riot, when actually the police caused the riot. So we started protesting this, putting out flyers. We wrote a letter to everybody in this town where their trial was going to be held. And we were indicted for what they called embracery, which was essentially jury tampering, although there was no jury. The jury had not been chosen. We saw it as a free press case because they weren't arresting the newspapers for saying the same thing we were. We ended up in this little town prison in Munfordville, Kentucky. I was on the second floor of this jail. Martha was where you see that little door on the left. On the first floor, there's a fire trap. The prisoners set it on fire while we were in there, just about killed all of us. But we eventually got out after 3 weeks and started working around the Black Six case, but also the no-knock laws, which we know with Breonna Taylor, and now another case last week of a Black man in Minneapolis being killed by the police when they just enter your house unannounced with guns drawn, and somebody reacts and then they kill them. So we were trying to stop that. It was part of the Nixon administration's rewrite of the federal criminal code. Needless to say, being in the South during this period of time was dangerous and difficult, and we didn't suffer the half of it. If you were in the Deep South and African American or Latino, poor white in the mountains, life was hell for many people. So we didn't suffer in that way. What we did suffer was a lot of tension and fear, like a lot of other people. But the movement was also a joyful experience. You had a lot of friends and colleagues and people that were working for a better world, and you had a really great sense of esprit de corps. Martha ran Operation Freedom, which gave out support to people who were evicted or lost their jobs. I ran the National Committee in the South, and we stopped the Nixon effort to rewrite the federal criminal code. And we went from the frying pan, which was Louisville, into the fire, which was Memphis. Deep South, going from up South to Deep South. But Memphis also had great things going on. This is Beale Street. You can see this is Stax Record Company. It was a great place for music and community, but it was also incredibly dangerous place. The Black Panther Party did a housing demonstration. They sat in at a housing building and all got arrested. So we started working on that. We also started working on Free Angela Davis and all political prisoners. Here's what it was like at that time. I'm sitting at home one day and Maurice Lewis from the Black Panther Party calls me, a friend of mine, and he says, Mike, the police are circling the block. They're in cars, they've got their guns drawn. What should we do? The reason he called me because I was an organizer and I was in the American Civil Liberties Union as well. So I put on my best coat, I put an ACLU badge on, and I went down and got to their house, and they were inside with guns, and I said, don't do a thing, just stay in there. And I just sat on the porch, and the police circled the block a few more times, and they realized there was a white observer there with something called the ACLU, and they went away. And I think that may have prevented the same thing that happened to Fred Hampton, because the police also had a drawing of the house that the Panthers were in, like what were the exits, what were the entrance points. That could have been yet another massacre. We started working all over the South against racist and political repression. The National Alliance was formed in Chicago. The Free Angela Davis campaign became the thing that sort of pulled everybody together all across America and the rest of the world. That's another whole story. Hopefully you might know about it, but if not, somebody can take my course in the spring, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Angela Davis. But it really shook the foundations of the country. This is me on a picket line. This is Martha on the picket line. This is Fania Davis Jordan, her sister, who came to speak in Memphis. This is at James Lawson's Centenary United Methodist Church, and this is where I first met James Lawson, great nonviolence advocate. While this was going on, we were under complete surveillance. Our phones were tapped and we knew it. People sat outside our house looking for what we were doing. They followed us when we handed out leaflets. They took down our license plates when we went to meetings. And Casey Wagner, one of our students, as a Mary Gates scholar, went through all my 800 pages of FBI files, and he discovered that the FBI had put me on its National Security Index, signed off by J. Edgar Hoover, the director, that I would be put into detention camp without trial in case of national emergency. This is what it was like at that time. A funny story in there I thought was funny. A report of 2 FBI agents sitting outside our apartment, spending the day, watching me go in and out. My office was in our apartment. We didn't make any money. It was $50 a week. And I was called the Southern director, but that's what I was doing, $50, plus I was delivering newspapers, and Martha was working in a cafe to try to make ends meet. So they follow me to the bank, and I make a deposit, and I come back, and they think it's all very nefarious somehow. I'm raising money through the mail for our group. So one of the things we did was to organize around the Angela Davis campaign. We held big rallies. We went into housing developments, handed out leaflets. And then one time we decided to hold a meeting at our friend Kathy Roop, who was next door to us. And lo and behold, the police came and beat people up. And later somebody bombed her car. Nothing was done about it. The FBI followed her around for the rest of her life, essentially ruined her life. I'll try to get through this quick now. So this is Gene Townsend, who is our friend, who's also a police agent. The person taking the picture is Ernest Withers, who was our friend, who is also working for the FBI. That's the way it was. But eventually we freed Angela Davis. We went on to work on the North Carolina repression cases, the Wilmington 10. This is me there in Wilmington. We also had tons of police brutality in Memphis. Here's my hand notes, police on a rampage. The Memphis 5 were 5 Black kids who were erroneously arrested and charged with firebombing a lounge. It was all a frame up by the police, but they were all put in jail. So we started a community bookstore and a center for dialogue. And this was leading then finally to graduate school. Like, we started to feel that people needed more depth, more to understand what was going on and why it got to be this way. And this is what drove me into history. I wanted to know, how did it get to be like this? So from there, I went into academia, and I think I can wrap this up in about 5 minutes. I went through these different institutions, all of which gave me a deep grounding in history, but especially Black history. And Howard University, was a fantastic experience, studying with Black students from Africa and the Caribbean and the US, with Black professors, a couple of white students. Everybody was fine with that. And Howard gave us teaching assistantships, which paid far more than being in the movement. So, that was my ticket really to starting graduate school. And living in DC was also a great experience. This is my singing partner on the left, David Sawyer. This is Congressman John Lewis in the middle. So I didn't stop being an activist just because I was a graduate student. And I started working finally with really singing with people from the movement that I knew in the South, but now really making it part of what I did too. And I was fortunate to meet John Hancock's of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union. We all thought he was dead, but we rediscovered him. And we were able to interview him and come out with a book about John Hancock, who otherwise would have been lost to history. So a couple more points. Tacoma, education and action. When I came to Tacoma, I had this backlog of experience and historical framework. And I met this guy named Bill Bixel, standing next to me there on the right, Catholic worker priest who had gone to jail numerous times. And so he drew me into his movement against nuclear weapons, against war, against intervention in Central America. And he was also a great counselor. When in 2011, my mother died and my wife, Pat's mother, died within 3 days of each other, and my father died 6 months later. And I said to Bix, I was in despair, of course, what do you do when this kind of thing happens? And he said, just be grateful, just be thankful. And so I've followed that ever since. That was the best advice I ever got. And I met this beautiful woman named Pat Krieger at the School of Music at the University of Puget Sound. And we started building a new life together. Martha and I remained steadfast friends our whole life, and her husband, Jonathan Zeitlin, and Pat and myself are all great friends. So life goes on. Tacoma has a special resonance. And we started in the Perkins building in 1990. The classes were very intimate. People would make a cake for you like this for my Vietnam in the 60s class. And we really had a great time. This is Mike Allen and Anthony DaCosta, some of our original faculty, and David Smith from University of Puget Sound, some of our early staff people, our educational leaders, out on the picket line for the graduate students, working again in the music area with Pat Wright and the Total Experience Gospel Choir and many other groups. And then finally, and I'll just wrap up with this, the last couple of years have been really important, I think. In 2018, my book, To the Promised Land, came out. That was King's last speech before he was killed. Someday we as a people will get to the promised land. What was the promised land? And so in my other books, I found the answer at his Nobel Peace Prize speech in 1964. I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits. And essentially, King was calling for the American dream to become real. And I've carried this message around the world and around the country. I really feel that the scholarship and the teaching is part of the mission of the movement that I'm part of. And I consider myself very much still a part of it. 2018 was 50 years since King was killed. We all went to Memphis and rededicated ourselves to these ideas. And I met people from the West Coast, ILWU, and other union people I knew. And it's still a beautiful thing. There's still a great movement. And UWT has a special role in this, whether people know it or not. This is James Lawson on the left. He's the great advocate of nonviolence who taught it to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And this is Patty George and Wilson. I'm forgetting his first name. Will Johnson, sorry. Black Student Union members. We brought Reverend Lawson to Tacoma to give 3 lectures, 2 of them in Black churches and 1 on our campus. And our staff, especially Paul Lovelady, filmed everything, and we made a movie out of it. And so now we have, because of UWT and because the graduate school supported it and so forth, we have a book that just came out of Lawson's talks, which go back to this moment at UWT. And we also have this book, this film, which, if we have a minute, I might play a clip from that. So thank you for listening, whoever's out there. And I'd be glad to have some dialogue. I think what I come out of this with is the title of the book that I'm working on, They Never Can Jail Us All, is about the freedom movement that, as it really is in the United States, to expand freedom for everyone and equality. And the title is from the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee song, "Oh Wallace, you never can jail us all, Governor Wallace, segregation's bound to fall." And so that's the guiding spirit for the book. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to a little talk.
Thank you, Mike. That was wonderful. And we will, everybody can, I just want to give you a quick round of virtual applause. Looks like you're getting that as I speak from everybody. Thank you all. So we will do a quick giveaway of some things to help you remember tonight, and hopefully to so that you spread the word about our Grit City Think and Drink. This is an all volunteer thing, has been from the start. So all of it, this is all done. All the speakers volunteer to come in. So we hope that you'll spread the word about this and come. All we want is more people to come and hear what's going on for talks like Mike. So we're going to give away 2 pair of our Grit City Think and Drink socks, so that you can remember whenever you put these on, you can remember to let people know to come back and check out some other talks. So we're going to do this by chat. So get ready, get your chat fingers ready. You're going to chat the answer to 2 different trivia questions, and then we'll get back to question and answers with Mike. So the first question, so I try to come up, this is totally on me, I try to come up with trivia questions that have something to do, even peripherally related to the talk that night. And so the first one is, Tacoma had its own civil rights riot in 1969 on a particular holiday. It was based out of the Hilltop area in Tacoma. So what was the holiday where Tacoma had its riot, civil rights riot, in 1969? Chat your answer. Oh, we already have somebody right off the bat. CJ Kiski wins it. Mother's Day was the Mother's Day. They officially, for some reason, it's called a disturbance. I guess other people call it a riot, depending on who you're asking. But in 1969, that was it. So if you haven't heard about that before, check it out. It was really interesting reading up on that. So what I need from you, CJ, is if you can chat to me, nobody else in the audience can see it. If you chat to me your mailing address and what size socks you wear, I will send them to you because, of course, we're not in person. Otherwise, I have no way to get you your socks. So thank you. So send me that info in the chat. So second question, everybody get ready. Your second question. So Mike Honey mentioned Pete Seeger. So that gave me just enough of a connection to actually ask you a Pete Seeger trivia question for the second pair of socks. So what college did Pete Seeger start at? Where did he didn't finish, but where did he start going to college? Let's see who knows this. And Casey already has the answer up there. It was Harvard, which is just kind of amazing to me. Although I do know some other great faculty at UW Tacoma that are quite activists and went to Harvard as well. So maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but Casey also, so you win a pair of socks. That was the quickest answers to these questions I've seen. So make sure that you send me your info on how to get it to you. Give me your mailing address and your size, and we'll get that going. So now we're ready for question and answers from Mike. So if you have questions for our speaker, please chat your question in the chat. Or I think it seems like Mike knows most folks that are in the audience. So if you want to ask your question in person, because you can't chat very easily, I think I'm okay with unmuting you to let you know, or to let you ask your question in person.
While they're doing that, I want to remind you of the title. Oh, Wallace, you never can jail us all. Oh, Wallace, segregation's bound to fall. Oh, Wallace, you never can jail us all. Oh, Wallace, segregation's bound to fall. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Couldn't help it.
All right, Mike, we got some questions started. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. Sarah asks, I was struck by your story of being at the Black activist house and your presence as a white man stove off police action. How do you think white allies might employ their privilege in today's political situation?
Boy, that's a good question. I think that, you know, privilege is partly about having access to things and being able to make your voice heard. And that is a form of privilege. Not everybody has that. So I remember Al Haber from SDS at a conference once told me, he said, everybody has a circle of power. You just have to think about what it is. Who do you know? Where do you go to school, churches, your job, neighborhood? Where is the circle of power? Whatever you have in that circle of power, use it. And particularly if you're have some, you know, what we would call privilege, I guess, make the best use of that you can. Ibram X. Kendi wrote this really good book about how to be an anti-racist. And I got to know him a little bit last year. And he said that everybody, it doesn't matter who you are, has the ability to fight racism. And so you just have to know where you can do it and find the ways to do it. Put your weight on the side of freedom. And I believed as a student when I was starting out, this was not about guilt. This was not, you know, what they're saying about critical race theory that's making everybody feel bad. It made me feel good to be in the freedom movement. And it also was my conception of this is the society I want to live in. So it was not just about Black rights, it was about everybody. And I think this is a very important way to look at it. And, you know, people like the Trump kind of people, it's all about divide and rule. I'd say unite and move forward.
Thanks, Mike. Anthony wants to know, what are some of the best ways we can become more socially active in Tacoma, specifically?
Well, there's a group called Democratic Socialists of America, DSA. It's the most active group that I've seen that's working on economic justice and racial issues. They meet regularly. And so the first thing, that's what I always thought. I have to find a group. I have to find somebody else to work with. Doing it by myself wasn't good enough. So DSA would be one thing. And a couple of years ago, we actually had a DSA student chapter at UWT, but I think the pandemic sort of put that out of commission, but it could be started again.
Gotcha. So can you tell us, so if folks, if you have some more questions, please chat those in. I was just wondering, so Mike, can you tell us about one of the more memorable protests or actions that you did while you were at UW Tacoma? What was one of those more memorable things?
Yeah. Well, I can think of a couple of them. One thing that I thought was really an amazing experience here in Tacoma was the Aaron Watada case. After the US invaded Iraq, well, before the US invaded, tens of thousands of us marched through the streets in Seattle. 1 million people around the world said to the Bush administration, don't do this, don't invade, don't start this, you know, and now we've seen the results of this stupid idea of invading Iraq. So we had a big movement in the streets, and then after the invasion happened, this commanding officer at Fort Lewis named Aaron Watada, who was Hawaiian and mixed race, refused to take troops to Iraq. He was commanding officer, and he said, "I'm not going. I'm not taking anybody. It's a war crime going on, and I'm not participating in war crimes, and I'm bound by, you know, the higher laws about that." And so that was a big thing, and a bunch of us organized a big conference on a weekend. We held it at Evergreen State College in Tacoma, brought in all these speakers. I made a short film about it, about 20 minutes long, with Paul Lovelady in our media department. We still got that. I could show it. That was one amazing moment. And I got to meet a lot of good people. And also with Bill Bixel, challenging nuclear weapons in Bangor outside of Tacoma. He was arrested along with some other people for entering the military base and trying to pour blood on a nuclear missile. And we had a big trial at the courthouse right across the street from our campus. And they asked me to testify as somebody who knew Martin Luther King's philosophy of civil disobedience. And lo and behold, the former Attorney General Ramsey Clark came also to testify that the US was out of alignment with the international agreements on the use of nuclear weapons by still having them, you know, sitting around over there in Bangor. These were things that happened in Tacoma that weren't happening. You know, I hadn't experienced those kinds of things exactly in other places. So I think, you know, and also because we're a port city and the International Longshoremen's Union is here, we've had a lot of demonstrations and work around union issues and working class issues because of that. And last thing I'll say, you know, our campus, one of the main buildings of our campus, which is now the student YMCA and Recreation Center, used to be the International Longshore Workers Union Hall. And we held all kinds of events there. I was the organizer for it. We brought in Dolores Huerta of the farm workers. We brought in Bobby Seale of the Black Panther Party and various other people as a multicultural center. And if somebody were to go back and look at the leaflets, and I've got them in my office, of all the different things we did to reach out into the community around our campus, it's kind of mind-blowing. We do less of it now, I'm afraid. But these were all, you know, to me, really great experiences and made me feel like I'm really part of Tacoma.
Awesome. We have one last question. Can you say something about Ann and Carl Braden of SCEF?
Yeah, you saw their picture there briefly. I met them when I went to Louisville, and Carl interviewed me for this job of anti-repression organizer. This was in 1970 when I was being sent there by the Unitarian Service Committee. And we talked and we talked, and I was, you know, 22 years old out of a college in Michigan, and he looked at me kind of odd, like, who is this guy? And in truth, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, you know, and I ended up in jail 6 weeks after I got there, and things went from bad to worse in a way for 6 years. So I learned, but it was a painful learning experience. Anyway, I thought, I'm never going to get this job. He was, you know, Carl had been through all the wars. He was famous for not backing down. And he said, well, tell me, what do you think is the main issue? I said, it's about the ruling class and the ruling class that's in power, and we've got to change the whole system. He said, you're hired. So that's how I met Carl Braden.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Mike. This has been a wonderful talk. Thanks to everybody who came tonight. Just to let you know, if you have some friends who didn't get a chance to check it out tonight, we will have the recording up on the Grit City Think and Drink website sometime, hopefully by the end of the week, after our crew turns it into a YouTube format so you can check it out. Really appreciate everybody coming in. I hope you all stay well, and we hope to see you on March 8th for our next talk. Or one of the other events that comes on the second Tuesday this year. Good to see everybody. Take care. And thank you, Mike, again. That was wonderful.